What happens when rap music gets, well, really, really scary? That's what we're talking about today. We're going to trace the bloody history of horrorcore. It's hip-hop's most macabre subgenre, the one that takes storytelling and just plunges it straight into a horror movie. So, let's get into it. Okay, so to really get what horrorcore is all about, you got to start with what came before it. Gangster rap, right? Gangster rap was kind of like street reporting. It was a raw critique of what was wrong with society. But what if you took that and just cranked the dial all the way to 11? What happens when telling stories about street violence turns into these wild fantasies about serial killers? Well, that's when you get horrorcore. It's pure theater, total grindhouse horror in your headphones. Right, so you're probably asking, how did we even get here? I mean, hip-hop started at block parties in the Bronx. How did it go from that to, all this demonic, super dark stuff? Well, the roots of this whole thing, they go way deeper than you probably think.
All right, first stop, the 1980s. Long before anyone even called it horrorcore, you had mainstream artists who were already kinda flirting with fear. They were playing around with scary stories, name-dropping horror icons, and pretty much setting the stage for what was coming next.
So check this out. The seeds were planted way back in 1980. You got Jimmy Spicer talking about Dracula in a song. Fast forward to the late 80s, and suddenly horror movie crossovers are everywhere. I mean, you've got DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince going up against Freddy Krueger in 88. Same year, the Fat Boys are asking, are you ready for Freddy? But here's the thing. All this stuff was mostly for fun, kind of playful. Under the surface, though, something way darker was starting to bubble up. Okay, so this is the moment everything changes. It's 1988, and you've got this huge split. On one side, you've got the super fun pop hit, A Nightmare on My Street. Total crossover success. But then, down in Houston, you've got a group called the Geto Boys, and they drop a track called Assassins. And man, this thing is genuinely disturbing. It's a story told from a serial killer's perspective. There are no jokes here, it's just grim, it's violent, and without even knowing it, they basically laid the foundation for the entire genre. And that leads us right to the Founding Fathers. We're talking about the artists who weren't just flirting with fear anymore. No, they built a house there and moved right in. In totally different parts of the country, a few key people started to build this new, terrifying sound on purpose. So let's head back down to Houston and talk more about the Geto Boys. Yeah, they came from gangster rap, but they took all that violence and all that menace and just pushed it into a whole other dimension. They literally created the blueprint for all the horrorcore that came after them. And this line right here, this is what made them so creepy. Imagine listening to a song about the most messed up stuff you can think of, and one of the rappers, Willie D, just cuts in and tells you this is real. It completely blurs the line between a scary story and a real threat, and that just cranked up the shock value to a whole new level. Their album from '89, Grip It, on that other level, was an absolute landmark. That one track, Mind of a Lunatic, became the instruction manual for the whole genre, with all these paranoid fantasies about murder and even necrophilia. See, the Geto Boys weren't just telling stories about the streets anymore. They were making straight-up brutal horror movies for your ears. Okay, now let's jump over to Detroit. Because at the very same time all this was happening in Houston, a teenager named Esham was inventing his own brand of this dark stuff. He had a name for it too. He called it acid rap. Now, Esham, he used these really shocking lyrics, but it wasn't just for shock value. It was his way of making this super bleak social commentary. This quote, it's from a song where he argues for abortion, but not because he's cruel. He's saying it's an act of mercy because the world is just that broken. I mean, that is a profoundly dark and complicated way to look at things. Get this, he was only 16 years old when he dropped Boomin' Words from Hell. And for Esham, hell wasn't someplace with demons and pitchforks. Nah, hell was the decaying streets of Detroit. His music was all about exploring these super dark thoughts, homicidal, suicidal thoughts, as a direct response to a world that he felt had basically abandoned him and his city. So the Geto Boys and Esham laid all the groundwork, and then came the mid-90s, and the whole genre just exploded. It was a total gore fest. It finally got a name, a whole bunch of new artists jumped in, and honestly, it got more gruesome and way more creative than ever. And boom, 1994. This is when it gets official. A trio out of New York called Flatlinerz were the very first to put the word horrorcore on a record. And just like that, this monster of a sound had its name. Then, also in New York, you get this super group called Gravediggaz. And let me tell you, this was a massive deal. We're talking RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan and Prince Paul from De La Soul, two of the most legendary producers ever. They brought this kind of intellectual vibe to horrorcore. For them, horror was a metaphor. They wanted to, and these are their words, resurrect the mentally dead. Pretty deep stuff. At the same time, way down in Memphis, 3-6 Mafia was cooking up something totally different. Their first album, in '95, Mystic Styles, it just sounded like nothing else out there. It was this, syrupy, lo-fi, menacing sound with all these satanic lyrics. But their biggest innovation, they made the triplet flow popular. You know that da-da-da rhythm? That's them. And it's so huge in rap today, you hear it everywhere, from Migos to Kendrick. And we have to go back to Detroit, because two guys who were big fans of Esham's acid rap, Insane Clown Posse, they took the whole theatrical part of the genre and just went nuts with it. I mean, they didn't just write songs, they built a whole universe, this mythology called a dark carnival. With the face paint, the soda, and this crazy intense marketing, they ended up becoming the absolute poster boys for horrorcore, for better or for worse. Okay, so when you get this visible, you're gonna get attention. And a lot of it was bad. The super violent lyrics sparked this huge moral panic. But at the same time, it created one of the most loyal and honestly one of the most misunderstood fan communities in all of music. Yeah, throughout the 90s, horrorcore lyrics kept getting brought up in connection to actual violent crimes. And that, of course, led to a huge media backlash. It got so intense that later on, Insane Clown Posse's fans, the Juggalos, were actually classified as a gang by some in law enforcement, even though the group fought against that label. But if you talk to people inside that community, you hear a completely different story. And this really gets to the heart of why this music connects with so many people. For fans who feel like they just don't fit in anywhere else, taking on this monster persona can be really empowering. This fan says it perfectly. It's not about hate. It's about family. It's about finding a place where it's okay to be different, where you're accepted for who you are. So horrorcore never really took over the mainstream, right? But its ghost is still in the machine. Its influence is way more widespread than you'd think, and you can find its DNA in the music of some of the biggest artists out there. I mean, just look at how far its influence has spread. You've got Eminem's album Relapse from 2009. That's pretty much a straight-up horrorcore album. You've got underground legends like Tech Nine, who built his whole incredible career on that sound. And you can totally feel its spirit in the early stuff from Odd Future, Tyler the Creator's crew, and even in super experimental groups like Clipping. So yeah, this genre is far from dead. It's just thriving in the underground and all over the internet. Which leaves us with the big question, right? The central question of horrorcore. Is it all just for shock value? Is it just trying to be gross and get a reaction? Or is it something deeper? Is it like a messed up funhouse mirror, reflecting the actual horrors of our world back at us, just in the most extreme way you could imagine? The answer? Well, just like the music itself, it's not simple at all.